Is the United States actually an example to the world when it comes to burnishing its pollution credentials? Cleaner than it was when the 45th president took office? He says yes. We'll examine the pluses and the minuses here on Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Well, with the US election campaign in its final crucial weeks, we're looking at some of the key issues. Today, climate change. The Paris Accord was ditched as President Trump insisted. I don't believe it. Have the last 4 years changed everything or nothing?
As forest fires have been blazing in western states and more frequent hurricanes hitting the southern coast of America, many are calling the US 2020 election a climate change showdown. President Donald Trump caused controversy in November last year when he formally withdrew from the Paris Agreement on climate change. Since then, he's continued to question the science around climate change.
Instead of focusing on radical ideology, my administration is focused on delivering real results, and that's what we have. And we right now have the cleanest air we've ever had in this country, let's say over the last 40 years.
But scientific experts contest Trump's claims, with one former official saying the decisions of his administration to weaken numerous air quality standards reveal his clear intent to worsen air quality in the long run. Nearly 2/3 of US adults say protecting the environment should be a top priority for the president and Congress. Trump's Democrat challenger Joe Biden believes the president has failed citizens.
At a time when wildfires are racing across the West, destroying homes and communities, and another hurricane threatens our coast. Mr. President, science knows. Science knows. They do know.
As they push for support in these vital weeks ahead of the election, voters interested in the fate of the planet will be watching closely.
Okay, so let us get the conversation going. I'm very pleased to say that we can welcome from Los Angeles, California, Antonio Bento, professor at the University of Southern California School of Public Policy, and he specializes in climate policy. Also in the same city, Jody Freeman, environmental law specialist at the Harvard Law School. She was a White House advisor under President Obama. And then we go to the other side of the country, Maryland, and Steve Milloy joins us. He was part of President Trump's Environmental Protection Agency transition team and wrote a book called Scare Pollution, Why and How to Fix the EPA. Steve, let me come to you first of all. Almost 4 years after President Trump took office, he vowed to change everything. How do you think things may or may not have improved under the 45th president?
Well, I think President Trump has done a great job at the EPA. He has reined in the overregulation, which was rampant under the Obama administration. He has ended the war on fossil fuels. America has become energy independent. We are working on energy dominance. It's just been tremendous. Our environment is as clean and safe as ever, natural disasters aside. And so I look forward to another 4 years when we can start actually improving how EPA does regulation to the extent any more regulation is actually needed.
Surely some kind of regulation is needed when it comes to protecting the environment and by extension the American public. Scare Pollution, your book, almost seems to set out to destroy the EPA.
No, it doesn't do that. What it does is it says that our recognizes that our environment is clean and safe as it is. We don't need more regulations. We have plenty of regulations. And our environment is going to stay clean and safe. What we need to do is worry about our economic growth, because when we have economic growth, we can afford to have a clean environment. If you look around the world, the nations with the worst environments are the poorest nations. So, I encourage nations around the world to work on their economic growth. Wealth will make their environments cleaner.
Jody, clean and safe. You're on the West Coast, you're in California, terrible fires there. Steve suggests that apart from natural disasters, things have been pretty good. Would you class the wildfires as a natural disaster or man-made?
Well, first of all, I come at this from a quite different perspective than Steve. I think President Trump has done an awful job on environmental protection, and in fact has made a point of trying to unravel all of the climate rules that the Obama administration put in place and move us backwards, actually more than any other president, move us backwards in terms of the fundamental environmental protections that have been established over the last 50 years since the EPA's creation. So I have just a very different view on the performance of the president. It's been documented that he's deregulated more extensively than anybody before, and even beyond what the business community has asked for. So this is really more ideological than it is about trying to balance economic growth and environmental protection. I'd also say that this notion that aside from natural disasters, all is well, it's as if you were saying to Mrs. Lincoln, aside from the assassination, how was the play? I mean, the natural disasters are connected to rising temperatures in the sense that the rising temperatures make these intense wildfires worse, they make intense hurricanes worse, they make weather patterns more unpredictable. And so everything the climate scientists have said will happen, you're witnessing beginning to happen. So the notion that this is the moment to dismantle climate regulation, I think is completely out of touch with science, and it's also out of touch with EPA's historical mission, which is in law, which is to protect the environment, reduce pollution, and ensure the public health. So I couldn't disagree more fundamentally with Steve.
And we will allow Steve Wright to reply on that in just a moment, but I want to bring Antonio into the discussion. Clean and safe, I asked. Jody, you're in the same city. What has it been like?
Well, what I was going to say before what I will tell is going on here in Los Angeles is that I also fundamentally disagree with Steve. And I want to start by making a very clear point, which is the administration has portrayed the issue of environmental regulation as putting it against the idea that when you do environmental regulations, your economy doesn't grow. And in fact, the case of California is the greatest example of where you can, in fact, advance environmental regulations with the intent of protecting public health and increase welfare of our vulnerable communities, and at the same time experience one of the largest growths that the country has seen. This idea of over-regulation, I think it's also what the president likes to call fake news, in a sense that when we look at what this administration has done, is really a massive deregulation, as Jody has mentioned. Of course, one could argue that perhaps one does this deregulation if something was wrong with the regulations in first place. But what our research has done, and in particular the work that I've been doing, for example, in the case of fuel economy standards, and in fact last year, with a paper in Science and then testifying in the House, we've actually documented that even the proposal for the rollback of the fuel economy standards was simply nonsense. It was flawed from the get-going, but most important, the proposal wouldn't pass simple cost-benefit analysis. So what we have seen is really an administration that, as Jody said, forgot the primary mission of the EPA, which is to protect public health. And now that we're talking about
okay, Antonio, I did ask you, is it clean and safe? Neither you nor Jody was able to get around. No, I'm going to have to. Let's hear what the president himself had to say when he was in California being quizzed by some politicians.
As the governor said, we've had temperatures explode this summer. You may have learned that we broke a world record in the Death Valley, 130 degrees. But even in greater LA, 120 plus degrees. And we're seeing this warming trend make our summers warmer, but also our winters warmer as well. So I think one area of mutual agreement and priority is vegetation management. But I think we want to work with you to really recognize the changing climate and what it means to our forests, and actually work together with that science. That science is going to be key. Because if we ignore that science and sort of put our head in the sand and think it's all about vegetation management, we're not going to succeed together protecting Californians.
Okay, it'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Well, I don't think science knows, actually.
So, Steve, the president says science doesn't know, but who else would know if science doesn't?
Well, science is not a crystal ball. It does not predict the future. You know, let's talk about those wildfires. A lot of people think, oh, this is man-made climate change. But I can look at the natural history of California and see that over the past 1,100 years, California is often in multi-decadal mega droughts, some lasting as long as 200 years. So for all we know, California could be burning, could be in drought and then burning for the next 200 years just because of nature. And whether it's man-made or natural, it doesn't really matter. California needs to manage its forests. The forests that are burning are the government-owned forests. The private forests are not burning. It's the government forests because they're not being managed, because we stopped logging in California 40 years ago. We just.
Well, let me put this to you. There was something called the National Climate Assessment. It reached the president's desk. It was based on thousands of climate studies, and 13, I think, federal agencies put into it, so government agencies, saying that emissions of carbon dioxide are caused by human activities, already causing lasting economic damage. He said, I don't believe it. It is alarmist. He's not listening to anybody, is he?
I think he's listening to his common sense, which is what a lot of this is. Gavin Newsom had a moment of common sense a couple of weeks ago. He said, you can't predict the weather, but you can be prepared. And so I think that's really President Trump's position. Now, Gavin Newsom has since walked that back. But I think that the president is right. California needs to manage its forests because I don't know. No one knows what the future holds. And all we can do is do what makes sense. And there's nothing California, there's nothing the United States can do to materially change carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere over the next 100 years. It's just the math is pretty simple. All we can do is practical things, and environmentalists don't want to do practical things. They don't want to control. They don't want to. What they claim they want to control the weather, but everything they seem to want to do is control us.
So let's hear now from Joe Biden, who may or may not be the next president of the United States. He lays the blame squarely at President Trump's door.
How many suburbs will have been blown away in superstorms? If you give a climate arsonist 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised if we have more America ablaze? If you give a climate denier 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised when more of America is underwater? We need a president who respects science, who understands that the damage from climate change is already here. Unless we take urgent action, it will soon be more catastrophic.
I mean, saying that President Trump's an arsonist, Jody, is taking it a bit far, isn't it?
Yeah, rhetoric aside, though, I really, once again, need to disagree with Steve. I mean, the notion that the United States can do nothing about climate change, it's such a defeatist attitude. It's completely false. In fact, if we were interested in being a global leader, which we have been in the past, we would be at the table leading international negotiations on a global climate agreement to reduce greenhouse gases and invest in adaptation so that humanity can respond appropriately to all of the disruptions that are coming, including climate migration, heat waves, and all the rest of it. You can't do the one thing without the other. You can't try to respond to this problem on the back end unless you're trying to mitigate the problem on the front end. And the United States is the natural global leader. And what the Trump administration has done is withdraw completely from the international space and decided that it's uninterested in trying to mobilize a world effort to manage climate change. This notion that California should manage its forests and that's the solution to this problem really just misses the larger trend that we're observing. And we cannot make progress without a responsible federal government. The Trump administration is not, on these issues, a responsible federal government. They deny the science. They're trying to dismantle the regulatory capacity of the federal agencies that are charged with this mission. And the notion that this falls to private citizens and a few states to just solve their problems is like an ostrich putting their head in the sand. So
okay, so let's take it to the next stage, if we may, and talk about what Joe Biden might do were he to win the election in November. What does he have planned, Antonia?
So, well, first of all, I think what Joe Biden has planned is to undo, to begin the mess that has happened in the past 4 years. So as Jody said, the United States need to take the leadership in the world, and this may consist simply as rejoining the Paris Agreement. But actually then we need a series of very aggressive policies that would put us in the path for carbon neutrality by 2050. And so the Biden-Harris ticket has announced a rather ambitious plan that would put us in the path for 100% clean energy to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, as well as a path for climate resilience. And I want to point that this is so important because if we come back to the argument of fires, what we are seeing here in California is the results of the fire in the form of very high levels of local air pollution. And so just to give you an example, in the past few weeks, we had levels of ozone that were the worst in probably 3 decades. And so what we need to realize is that this is not just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This is also about protecting the public health of our community.
And if it is not Biden, if it is 4 more years of President Trump, do you envisage states like California perhaps striking deals with countries outside the United States because the federal government wouldn't want to do that and might be too burdened by taxes that were put on them by countries that says you're not sticking to climate agreement?
So as an economist, I can give you the economics perspective on that, and I'm sure Jody will speak on the legal terms. Absolutely. In fact, we just have seen our governor announcing the banning of gas-run cars by 2035. So in other words, all new sales of vehicles in California starting in 2035 will be electric vehicles. California, of course, already has their own cap-and-trade program, and we have seen recently from the European Union also the announcement of a very aggressive program. China just did the same, so there is no reason in principle, if the federal administration doesn't move forward, that California and other parts of the country, perhaps including the Northeast, will join forces with the rest of the world.
I've got to bring Steve in because you find that amusing.
Well, yeah, there's so much to talk about. I don't know how we can fit this all this in. So California's had a cap and trade program for the last 12 years. Guess what? The wildfires are worse than ever because nothing has been accomplished. There's no one around the world that's really cutting emissions. Emissions have gone up among all Paris signatories. I don't believe that China is going to be carbon neutral by 2060. I don't think anyone's ever going to be carbon neutral. That's just fantasy. Wind and solar have very limited use. The Greens oppose nuclear power. Where's all the energy going to come from?
I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a graphic on the screen about the way that Democrats and Republicans appear to differ when it comes to their top priorities. Let's take a look at this one. Democrats, climate change, their #1 priority, 22% saying that was where they would like to go, followed by coronavirus and healthcare. Republicans put that alongside. It's the economy, as it often has been, then abortion, and then crime. Steve, I'm just going to ask you why you think there is such a divide when it comes to party politics about things that people really care about.
Well, there's a party divide because climate is political. It's got nothing to do with science. It's all politics. And, while you're citing polls, you might want to look at the Washington Post poll that showed most Americans are not willing to pay $2 a month on their electric bill for climate. People say they're concerned, or some people say they're concerned, but are they really? They're not really willing to pay.
Okay, let me come to Jody right now. I'm going to throw up a note. Oh, sorry, you want to say something first?
Can I jump in and offer a little bit about what the Biden administration has said and what we could expect if Biden were to win? And that is a view about climate change and environmental protection that sees this as an opportunity moment rather than a moment for constraint and overregulation. I think the vision is one in which there's a clean energy future upon us. The world is headed in the direction of clean energy technologies, renewable energy sources, energy storage, energy efficiency. And I think what Biden has said is he wants to make investments in that future. He wants to make a bet on that future so that America can lead and not fall behind the rest of the countries of the world. And I think that's the right way to see it. And I hope it's a vision that can attract not just Democrats, but Republicans. So the Biden campaign has put out a set of pledges that have to do with making sure our electricity supply is carbon-free by 2035, making sure we head to a carbon-neutral economy by 2050, and taking steps to invest in that transition by modernizing our infrastructure, which I hope everybody can get behind. We have a 20th century infrastructure in our electric grid and the rest of our energy infrastructure that needs to be transformed into a 21st century infrastructure.
Okay.
That's about technology,
Antonio,
that's about innovation, and that's about private sector leadership, not just public sector regulation.
Jody, thank you very much for those thoughts. What I was going to say to you, I'll now put it to Antonio, is if it is Joe Biden in the office, can he undo what you say is all the harm that has been done in the last 4 years? And Steve, I'll come to you for a reply in just a moment.
Absolutely, because it seems to me that it's going to be fresh air for the rest of the world with a new administration. Because as I said a minute ago, we are already seeing leadership coming from the European Commission. And contrary to what Steve says, I actually do believe that China will indeed move towards carbon neutrality as well. And so some of this, of course, is politics. And actually, I also believe that it has to do with your own personality. And so Biden, as a human being, it seems to me that it will restore most of all the trust of our allies. And so
he also wants to put a lid on some fracking, doesn't he? Particularly in states like Pennsylvania. That would deprive people who have had long-term unemployment issues with jobs that they've now got under President Trump.
Sure. So what I would say with regards to that is the following. The future is with clean energy. And what we have to do as well is to think about ways to transition and to retool workers that are in sectors that perhaps over time would be phased out. So whether there would be limits on fracking or not, I think they should be based on a very simple cost-benefit analysis. And as far as I am concerned, perhaps it is time to start eventually phasing out fracking. But of course, then what
you can see why those people who've got jobs in fracking at the moment would want to see another 4 years, perhaps, of President Trump and his environmental and his climate policies.
Of course, and so what you have to do is to inspire them and to actually show that the alternative could actually be better, not only for you, but for your children and your and the generations to follow. And I actually believe that when you communicate that very well, you can convince these vulnerable communities that it's actually in their best interest to side with this transformation, because what we often
it's possibly going to be rather difficult to persuade them if they don't have a job tomorrow that looking 10, 15 years down the line is a wise thing. I take your point, though. Steve, let me come to you. Ken Caldera, climate scientist, he's at the Carnegie Institution, had this to say about President Trump's new policies, going to send a signal to the rest of the world that, look, it's each nation for themselves, so let's just go for the cheapest development trajectory and screw everyone else. That is a fairly widely held view, isn't it?
Well, of course, you know, the irony is that the United States is the only nation that has significantly reduced its emissions, and that's thanks to fracking, which Joe Biden, you know, despite his denial, probably will ban. You know, I worked in the coal industry during Obama Biden. They promised they weren't going to ban new coal plants. Guess what? They did exactly that. So Biden will use the entire power, or whoever is running his administration would use the entire power of every agency in the federal government to go after fracking. The states would join in. Pretty soon, you know, we would lose our energy dominance. We would lose our energy independence. Gas prices would go through the roof. Consumers would be screwed. And you know what? The weather is going to remain the same.
Are you talking about the rest of the world, or are you just following what President Trump is accused of doing by Ken Caldera and saying, screw everybody else? It's not about everybody on this planet. You're talking about everybody, perhaps in the United States.
You show me where in the world people are doing anything on climate. As I said, the United States has already scrubbed about 20% of its emissions from its power sector thanks to fracking. What's the rest of the world doing? China's not doing that.
Let's ask Jody. Clean a country because of fracking?
So
what do you say?
First of all, the facts matter.
No, we don't have very much time. Just a quick one. Clean a country because of fracking.
Yeah, just to let you know, Biden has said he's not going to ban fracking. And first of all, a president cannot unilaterally in the United States legally ban fracking. It's a canard, so let's just leave that to one side. The
All right,
point
is the country
is,
cleaner?
To ban fracking, like they did.
The fact is, we have two fundamental visions here in the United States that are going to be on the ballot coming up shortly in November. One vision is a backward-looking view, a view that wants to support dirty energy, and it's out of step with the society and the need to move to a cleaner energy source. That's the fundamental difference. You can vote to go backwards, or you can
Steve
vote to
says
go
the
forward.
US is cleaner. Is it cleaner?
The implication globally is that a leader who will re-engage the international community on climate change is a leader like Joe Biden. And I think that's what you're going to see the U.S. population make a decision about. Do they want to come back into the international community on this issue and on all of the other issues on which the United States is withdrawn? And I think you're going to see a choice. I hope the choice will be to re-engage, work with our allies, solve global problems.
We've got to end it there. I can only ask the questions. I will not always get the answers that I want, or indeed some answers at all. Look, it's much appreciated, everything you had to say. Great to have you on the program, and thank you wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. That is all the time we have today. We hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.